Hi everyone, welcome to the Google Digital Garage and this training session on keeping your family safe online, a really important topic for today. So my name's Annie and I'm one of Google's free digital skills program trainers, and I've been with the Digital Garage for over 6 years now. I'm also experienced in digital marketing and have had my own online business, so I feel I can understand and navigate the digital world reasonably well. I'm also a mother, and so that's really important for this session because keeping our children and families safe online is a really important issue for us all as parents, as caregivers, and guardians of children. So I'd also like to introduce, because I'm not alone, we're very fortunate to be joined by Sam in the chat. You'll be able to see Samantha by both her name and a blue spanner next to it. Please do engage with us because this session is really to help you. So the more you engage, the more we can give some support to you and some clarity as well on this difficult and most important topic. This is not a standalone course either. We do many others at the Google Digital Garage. And if you go to g.co/digital garage, you'll see all the array of courses we offer. One in particular, given the subject we're talking about today, that I'd like to point you in the direction of is keeping safe, safety first online for yourself. So that's keeping yourself protected and safe online, which is a great thing to do in combination with this particular webinar so that you get a full view of how we can keep safer in the all-important digital space we now live and breathe in. So just some extra housekeeping. If you can't see or hear us correctly, if you press F2 or refresh, that often irons out any of the problems. And please do join in the chat. But to do that, you need to have a YouTube account, which is quick and easy to set up. And you simply sign in and then you can join here in the chat. Now, it might be that there's a lot of information here that you find really important and you want to come back to. So don't worry, this is recorded and you can come back to the link within 24 hours to review it. So without further ado, we're going to look today at keeping your family safe online and work at it together. So we're actually, as a partnership, Google have decided to partner up with a really important organisation called Internet Matters. Now, it seemed like the most appropriate partnership for this topic because where Google have a deep understanding of technology and the internet, Internet Matters have a great focus and expertise when it comes to guiding parents through the many issues that they're facing when it comes to the digital world. So these two made natural partners to come together to discuss this topic about keeping safe online. Internet Matters is a non-for-profit organisation and it's there to empower parents like you or carers to help keep those children that we have that we care about safe online in the digital world. So today we're going to educate you about the web safety aspects and also what it means for you and your family so you can feel more confident about the internet world. Because let's be honest, many of us can remember a time where the internet didn't exist. But if you say that to your children, they'll probably look at you like you're an alien from outer space because they are growing up and immersed in this world of digital. It's a big part of their lives. So getting to be safe and secure is as important online as offline. So this is what we're going to explore today. So this session is aimed at anybody who wants to keep children safe online. I've mentioned parents, but there's also carers such as grandparents. It might be guardians, uncles, aunties, teachers, or just anyone who wants to support and guide children through this all-important subject. So we're going to take you through 3 areas today. And the first is really unpacking what it is to be safe online. So we're going to discuss the power of the internet, all the possibilities that come with having the internet, but at the same time, the key areas, because everything has a pro and a con, to having that power and what we can do to service it to our best effect to protect our children. And then we're going to look deeper dive into the specific areas and risks that the children face and that people face online and introduce those tools that can help to proactively combat and start really the important conversations that we need to create as parents and caregivers with those children so that we can manage and support them with their safety. And finally, we're going to look at boosting those attitudes to safety. So it's going to look at some tips basically on how we can positively and proactively work towards having those conversations that we need to have around internet safety that we might want to hide from, but it's important because we all live in that world now today. So we're going to try and open up that dialogue and help you open up that dialogue with your children around you too. So here we want to establish the safety landscape, because we know digital has become massive, it's all pervasive, and particularly in COVID times, we're going to explore what happened in lockdown and how that gave even more of a light on the time we spend with digital. And we're going to explore the challenges that we have as parents, as carers in this space, and what we might be able to do to manage those challenges. Because let's be honest, children just don't know what it is to be without the internet. Some 2-year-olds are now able to use an iPad better than a magazine. That's just so intuitive to them. And so we're actually being left behind our children in many ways, in many cases. So keeping up with them is a big part of this as well. So let's dive into this and see how, as parents, we can better understand that landscape together. So I want you to just take a moment, and there will always be a delay between what you put and what I see. Thank you from Samantha and what she puts into the chat. But I'd really love you to reflect on the kinds of things that might be concerning you about digital safety for your children. And obviously what's happened here is you've come to this session because you have some concerns. So what are those biggest concerns that you're facing? Have a moment to jot it down, have a think about it. And if you don't want to share, that's absolutely fine. But do reflect on these points and think about, where we can help you best. There could be many reasons really that you might be here today. Some might be screen time. So I know, for example, in lockdown, my little one was using a lot more screen time than I would have liked, but it was kind of the setup we had as a world, and I tried to use it constructively. We'll talk about that a bit later on. But sometimes it might be that you're concerned about their gaming habits. Perhaps they're doing a lot of gaming and it's becoming all pervasive to their lives. Or maybe you're just not sure about what content they are seeing and you're wanting a bit more control over that. So there could be lots of reasons that are concerning you. So when Internet Matters asked these questions to parents in a focus group, they came out with lots of specific answers to this particular question. And so you might see your answers in some of those on the screen at the moment. So you're not alone. And most parents share their worries and are searching for help actively, like you today, who've come to the session. So one of the things we want to do is, in order to stay engaged, it's really important that we get into and immerse ourselves in our children's world. So for instance, I know in lockdown, there was an awful big rise and interesting trend towards TikTok and children. So you might find that your children were on TikTok, or you might have found that they were using YouTube a lot, which is a common thing with children. In fact, YouTube is often used more than the actual TV for children nowadays. So if you have a child who's in, say, year 6, they're on Instagram or they're on TikTok and you're not on there, you might be missing out a lot, or will be missing out a lot, on what they're learning about and how it's used and how to keep safe and what it means. So it's a great idea, in order to be engaged with your children, is to enter their world. So we haven't had that world necessarily. And if we aren't on those channels yet, we might want to try and do that, because the importance of becoming involved into their worlds, their accounts and what they're doing is going to give us a much bigger opportunity to help protect them in those spaces. If we don't know anything about it, we might be fearful without really knowing how to protect them. So with just so many concerns out there, what we want in this session is to offer some tips, some guidance, basically, around positive approaches to these many things that are out there in the digital space. And while some parents may approach these concerns by just restricting or stopping access, it's not necessarily the best approach, because this is their world. This is a world we might not be familiar with as much, but it is their world, and it's where they're going to work, live, socialize. And it's important that we get to know it. So being online, as I say, it's a part of everyday life now. It's prevalent everywhere. So from a very early age, they're introduced to the internet. And even if you're not somebody who has devices at home, they will start using it within their schooling system from a young age. So it is, it is a good question to actually ask yourself, how old was I when I got hold of this technology? So I know for me, it was much later in life, which meant that I didn't grow up with that technology at all. And you might be able to relate to that. So now that they're growing up with this technology, we've got to keep a pace and get up to speed. And Dr. Linda Papadopoulos often talks about how parents experience most things before their kids do. So if you think about it, we teach and we support and cultivate our children emotionally and socially and otherwise through our own experiences, our own wisdom. But if we didn't grow up with that and there's no history of that for us, then the usual rules that would apply in those situations can't really apply as well in tech. So that's why we're trying to demystify it a bit for you here and look into it a bit more deeply. And perhaps this is why we feel so much struggle with keeping them safe online, because there's always been risks in the real world as well. But now it's translated to the online world and we just can't fathom it sometimes because it's not what we've grown up and used. And some of the pace of technology is an important point as well. So you may remember or have used Pokemon. Well, the way that it went up to 45 million users in just a few days shows how quickly it can escalate and how fast digital and the speed of digital moves. And when we look at other forms of technology, so the TV, it took 50 years to come about, whereas the internet, it was a very, very small fraction amount of that. So everything is moving quickly, and rather than being scared of it, it's really nice to get involved in that space. And actually, tech is such a force for good. And we often forget, we're talking about the things that we don't understand and we've not experienced perhaps as parents when we were children. But there's so much positivity to having the internet and the access to it. There used to be encyclopedias on my shelf in the lounge, and my dad would order hundreds of these encyclopedias and feel proud that we had access to knowledge. But the hassle of selecting the right book, the right title, the right page now seems like a really big wasted job because we can find it very quickly with the internet. So they have a wealth of learning. They have an opportunity to learn at a rate of knots. Any question they may have, they're able to now ask to the search engines. And not just that, but you'll probably remember the guy writing on the blackboard at school and it really wasn't engaging you very much. Maybe you can remember that. Well, now we've got interactive, colourful games that really bring that learning to life and help us to retain lots of information and lots of knowledge. So it's completely different to have a tech world to learn in and such an opportunity for good. And freedom of expression. So, it's hard, isn't it, to find people that think like us. But now with the internet world, on any subject, we can find somebody who's happy to express themselves. And there's a tribe for that subject. Perhaps we might be the ones that create those tribes as children, and then it might become the careers that they have. Or it might be that they just find other like-minded people there. And from starting a blog to following, your favorite artist on Instagram or, just aspiring creatives in general, this is a time and a place to really accelerate your career really in that space and get known in a way that you couldn't ever do that before. And I've just seen that Anna Paula Soars. Hi, Anna. Thanks for joining us. Even adults use it for good, teaching educational games. Yes, absolutely. So, me as an adult, as a parent, as a person, I get so much learning from the internet and from technology. And I can't imagine now not having that access. It really makes me feel that we have somewhat of an equal platform wherever internet is available to have that access to information. But even despite all this, it is obviously still a complex place that we're all learning about. And it was not actually built intentionally for children in the first place. So because of that, it's not as obviously regulated as some of the children's services. So that's why we need to look at it as, yes, it's an enabler, but also we need to take some responsibility for the power of it and, learn more about it as we go. So I hope that you jotted something down in the initial stages about what your concerns are. Now I want you to consider a little bit now about what you think they're actually doing online. You might have a handle on this. You might know exactly what your children are doing online, or perhaps you don't, because I know I certainly feel that is a concern for me, knowing exactly what children are doing, my children or my child is doing online. So perhaps we think they're doing things like gaming. You know, they might be spending a lot of time gaming. It's a big area for children to socialize now. They can meet people all over the world doing gaming. So perhaps that's what they're doing, or are they downloading content? What content? That's an important question, isn't it? But are they downloading something? Or maybe they're connecting with friends. So to have a complete handle on what they're doing, we really need to get to know and understand what they're using it for. And so having that firm grip and conversation with them and monitoring what they're doing is going to help us to feel more safe about them being online. So what we really want to find out as well, because they are a different generation, they're growing up in this tech world, and we want to understand what that means to them, the powers of it. We need to think about, you know, what kind of things and principles are there now online for them as they're growing up, as different to us. I mean, children on average are spending around 3 hours, 15 minutes on the internet a day. So that's quite a lot of time when you think. So it's actually their world now. And 26 times per day is how often they post on social media. So they're posting a lot of content, and this is an average, on social media. So they're spending their time sharing their thoughts already there from a young age on social media and putting it out there. They're also, despite the age, and we do know the minimum age being 13, the children aged 11 and 12 often have a social media profile page. This is something that we need to be aware of too. And a third of people that play online haven't even met in person. So actually, where we used to meet our friends down the street, now they tend to also be meeting in the online space. So it is very different for what's happening now for the children. Now, we're just going to stop for a question break. I don't see any coming in just yet, but please do use this time and opportunity to share any questions you've got, because that's what we're here to do, to answer for you. And there'll be a few more question breaks throughout, and I know Samantha will be amazing in the chat answering questions for you too. So do keep those questions coming in. So we're going to now define the risks. So we've talked about the power and the breadth of what the internet can provide in brief, but also there are going to be risks, just as there is in normal life, there will be in the online world. So we need to address those concerns and then look at what we can do, some practical steps to, and useful tools as well, to help you and see what we can tackle together. So these, I asked you earlier, what were you worried about in terms of protecting your children? And, you know, what your concerns are for coming today. And these are some of the things that we found out are what parents tend to worry about most. So these will help to give you some context in a minute. We're gonna go through each of these one by one. But it's really important to get these kind of conversations started with your children. And it's never really too early an age to get these conversations going as well. There are bits of content they may come across at any age. So it's good to start doing that from an early point. So to start with, we're going to look at screen time. Now, I don't know about you, but I had Zoom fatigue when it came to lockdown. I was using it for work. I was using it for socializing. I had a group for the social time. I had a group for the work thing. And then I had my work itself. And then I had my entertainment online. I think we all did very similar, but it became a real immersive world of tech for everything we could do with it, showing us the broad scope that we have with technology. But it also showed us that we can learn things, you know, how much home educating happened with screen time. But as mentioned, there's pros, there's cons, and now we need to look at how we can approach our concerns regarding screen time. So sleep can be affected by the screen. Some people say leave your phone 3 meters away from your bed. And then when the alarm goes off, you're going to get up, you're going to answer it, you're going to be interested to turn that thing off. But what we don't think about is that that blue light that's coming out of the phone is actually affecting our rhythm, affecting our brain. It's tricking it to thinking it's daylight, that it's, you know, daytime, and not letting us sleep. So actually having our phones nearby or having them on close to bedtime is not a great idea. So the effect on sleep is, you know, quite an important thing, because without sleep, it's like walking in soup. We can't concentrate. It's hard enough with sleep as parents as it is. So for ourselves, we need to think about that, but also for our children. So they may be on their phones and getting into the habit of doing it, and that can affect obviously their sleep patterns. And we're all creatures of habit, aren't we? So we also have to think about the behaviors that being on our phone so much can create. So if we start going in and, you know, glancing at our phone, easily done 150 times a day, I mean, it sounds a lot, but if we think about it, it's very easy to do. Then it doesn't take long to start getting into this habit. And we know that it's easy to make a habit. It can happen quickly, but to break it, it can take weeks and weeks. So if we're able to kind of adopt good behaviors and habits from the start, or early on, or as soon as possible, then that will help us further down the road with our children, and also with ourselves, because we have to show from the front, to lead from the front, what we're suggesting to our children, I guess. But also, the effect of screen time on brain development is an important area that we didn't have when we were growing up. And that means that, you know, well, obviously all the positives are we're getting lots and lots of information, but the downside is that can make us quite anxious. It can bring on some kind of amplified anxiety, and it affects the nervous system, the arousal. So what we tend to do is just get overwhelmed by it. So it actually can affect our brains fundamentally as well. So we're starting to see that millennials are more forgetful than OAPs. You know what? We've outsourced basically everything to the internet. You know, we've got Google Maps to drive us somewhere. We don't need to look at a map. No more are we bringing out the big maps and trying to find our way. It's, you know, it takes us there. If we have to think for ourselves, it gets a bit scary in that sense. We also have our calendar and alerts to tell us what we're doing on the digital space. So it keeps us organized, but also we don't have to think as much. So attention spans have gone right down from minutes and minutes to only 8 seconds in some digital space, and 2 seconds in social media. So we're actually really low on memory. So it's about, particularly the younger people, it's about how much screen time we need to boost us up and how much screen time we want to stay away from. And that's the message that we need to teach to our children. So now we understand the issues, let's look at how we can proactively deal with them. So I mentioned lockdown because that was a really incubated period of time, wasn't it, where we were all focused around technology, and we could see very quickly what technology could do for us. But not all screen time, and we were saying about screen time and saying it's, you know, something we shouldn't do too much of. But not all screen time is equal. And as mentioned, when we had lockdown, we could do different things with it: socialize, school, get educated, exercise. I mean, it became literally all our activities, all our social life, and all our learning in one place. And that's available to us at any time. So it was very helpful in lockdown, but screen time being used efficiently and appropriately is really what we're talking about here. So let's try and look instead at what the screen time is being used for. Is it being used for research? It obviously depends on the child's age and stage. Is it being used for research? Is it used for socializing, connecting? Is it used for homework? Is it used for, you know, learning and being creative? So not all screen time is equal, and finding out that digital diet that works best for you, your family, and your child is a really useful thing to do. And of course, making sure they're safe, which is what we're here talking about today, we need to set up some parental controls for. And as they spend more time online in this sort of climate change that we've been in for quite some time now, but is now been probably expanded even more since COVID, we've learned even more about how to use technology. It is a good time to think about parental controls and what we can do. And also it's thinking about the family as a whole. So We want to have a harmonious family, and it was just the same before the internet, that we had to have a consideration for each person in the family. But now we want to probably even more so bring back the importance of meal times and homework times and allotted schedules. Perhaps that's what we want to do. And then within that, we can set screen time limits around that criteria. And we'll talk more about that as well in a bit. So part of actually managing this means that we need tools, because unless we're sitting over their shoulder, which is helpful for us to learn, but if we can't do it 24/7, then we need to try and have some controls in place to support that. A bit of both, a bit of supporting, being there and supervising, and a bit of parental controls is a nice mix. But some great tools now exist to support us in our aims for keeping our children safe online. And Family Link is one of those. So it can literally help us to directly lock the child's device at certain times of the day. So if we're wanting to save them some screen time and not give them too much of that and too much overwhelm of screen time, which we'll also look at later, then that can support us with it. We can set it by days, by times of the day and days of the week. So we can set up a schedule for the weekdays and perhaps for the weekends. And we might want to set it around bedtime. We might use that to help us all be on board with when bedtime should be, because we've learned it stimulates us having our phones on late at night and doesn't help with our sleep patterns. And also homework and dinner time. So when that might be within your house, what times you decide that could be, or days that might be, you might want to schedule that in, as well as family time. We have to actually schedule, don't we, our time in with our family. And that's not a new thing either. We had to do that predating technology and the internet. But now, even more so, we're becoming more organized with that, I guess. So that's something that we might want to look at in terms of getting that activity report set up so that we can have Family Link help us with our scheduling of what content we're using. Alongside Family Link, other tools exist that help us to consider screen time. And one of them that I particularly like is Forest App. It's where you can pick different trees. You can actually select your trees and it builds beautiful forests. So it's quite a nice experience to do that with your children. But it also helps them manage screen time. So that's a great way to start using these apps as well. And also what it does is it can help give a visual basically of how long you're spending online. And another example, so we've got something called Our Pact. It's free and it's both on iPad and it's on iPhone, and you can turn it on and off and use across different screens. So these apps and others like it, they're incredibly helpful to help build. The most important thing is the attitudes and behaviors that we're wanting to adopt in this new space of digital world that we live in. So let's look at some top tips that matter now probably to your children. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is, how long, first of all, that a child is online is, an important criteria for us to consider. But that screen time, there is no magic number. It's really up to you. You may find that you've got a lot of study that needs to be done and a certain amount of time needs to be apportioned to that. Or you might feel that, you're wanting to cultivate some relationships and connections for them online. Whatever the activities you feel are appropriate are, you might want to talk about with your child and then agree screen time. But whatever we do, it's not new this, but we need to be a role model for that behavior. So we're the parent leading from the front and we need to model that behavior. So if we're saying, stay off your phone at tea time, we shouldn't really be going on our phone ideally, because it doesn't set the example that we want to set. And then it doesn't really encourage them to do the behavior that we want to encourage them to do. But also, it's great to encourage them to take up alternative activities. And it is something we might need to actively encourage a little bit. But things like picking up their favourite book, magazine, getting outside. That was something else we did a lot of in the lockdown period. Getting out and finding the natural world and the trees and the weather and getting outside. Or visiting a friend. All of these things can take us away for a time from digital and start to give that better balanced diet that we're looking for, that nice scorecard of a healthy balance between technology and everything else in the world. And also, maybe you might want to set up a unplug and play time with the whole family, where maybe you've got a game that you play together and it's a nice time to focus on playtime. Because with our busy schedules as parents as well, we might need to set that time up in advance so that we know it's going to happen, but it also keeps them away from the technology. And then we can agree, perhaps on an appropriate amount of time that they're going to access technology, and then consider a reward if they get it back. But although this is all important in managing it, it's really important as mostly to kind of get them thinking about their use of technology and why it's important to them and what they can use it for to empower them and to make their lives better. So very much around conversation and that kind of thinking too. But there is obviously content that we don't want them to see, that we want to protect them for, that inappropriate content that sometimes your child may stumble upon. And this is going to be happening by accident. And it's because now we've got so many connected devices everywhere they go that it's in their pockets and everything they're doing. So they might be sent something by a friend, for example, a link, or they might be, connecting with different people across different platforms. So it's all about looking at our systems and our control over our systems, I guess. And there's some device communication systems such as Bluetooth and Apple's AirDrop that they can even share inter-device communication. So it's really getting up to speed as well with the kind of content that's out there. So hopefully this session is giving us a bit of an awareness of what is out there too. So let's look at some of the content that they could be accessing as well as how they access it. So there's lots of different inappropriate content that as caregivers, as parents, as people, we don't want our children to see. And your child's reaction to any of this content will, of course, depend on their age and also the maturity level that they're at. So it will be very variable as to, how this kind of content will affect them at different points. And so it could also be difficult, as we mentioned, to monitor this kind of content and to make sure that, to see where they're accessing it from an internet-enabled device. So that could be anything from a mobile, an iPad, a tablet, laptop, the TV. Now we have smart TVs. So there's different places that they can access this content. So a child's curiosity is a delicate thing. But, there are some ways for us to manage it and to raise awareness around this kind of content. So we talked a bit already about the importance of driving those conversations that might be even unfamiliar to us, but bringing them forward into the foreground and having those conversations with our families is a very important thing when it comes to this space. And a family agreement from the beginning is a great place to start those conversations. So we could talk about boundaries in those chats. We could also perhaps give children some strategies on kind of how to cope with anything from what they see upsetting online. So if they see something that makes them upset, knowing to give their device to their parent or to turn it off immediately or to tell someone as soon as possible that they've seen this content. That once they get in their minds that is something that they should do each time and they feel safe to do it, that will open up the lines of communication and make it easier for both of you or all of you to have that conversation in the future. And it is starting that conversation. So it's just getting started with it. So when is the time to start? Well, really, as soon as the child starts using the internet, and that could be as young as under 4. Or it could be when they're at school from 4 or 5. It will depend, but most will start very young. And that's because they grow up with it, they learn with it, they use it in schools. So it is something that is never too early to start that conversation with. And in those conversations, you want to help them understand there might be times that they come across content that they're not, comfortable with, that's upset them. But tell them, they can come to you, they can talk to you, and you're available, and it's, nothing to be ashamed or uncomfortable with in coming to you. And although that sounds crazy, but this is the kind of conversations we've always had as parents, we kind of have to open that conversation up in a new way with them for this content, because we probably didn't have these conversations. So we have to be aware of them to start them with our children. But we had similar ones, but about different ways of having those conversations, like saying no to strangers. So it's just the digital equivalent of that, really. But also, we've got to encourage the children to think before they click. Otherwise, goodness knows, we'll be getting pop-ups of emails and what sounds too good to be true, we need to tell them isn't going to be true. A holiday to Walt Disneyland is unlikely just because you clicked a banner. Teaching them what's important about these pop-ups and what they can't be trusted is really key as well. And yeah, supervise as well if you can, because that's going to be a great way of learning what they are doing on there. And then you can know what kind of rules to set from that point. But we also want tools. So long gone days are the times where we had one single controlled unit, because as life has evolved, technology has evolved, so has the different methods of using it. So we don't have one now family PC to monitor. We have lots of internet connected devices that we've already mentioned. And so we need to keep up in this modern parental world of digital. And as mentioned before, I mean, the average age actually of a child getting even a phone is 8 to 11. So that shows how mobile this connection is with the digital space. And so to protect them, we need to be looking at the inappropriate content they're coming across. So let's start first with those devices that they're taking everywhere with them these days. So there's lots of power around those devices being with them and keeping them safe, knowing where they are. But you also want to have a look at how you can protect the content they're coming across. And every device comes with a manual. It's worth reading, investigating what their particular guidance is on parental controls, and have a look at the manufacturer and what is said, so that you can set that up really nicely. Many smartphones and manufacturers have these settings now built into the phones, particularly the newer ones, and Apple especially does have a new screen time feature announced, which is the coming iOS 12. So have a look into that as well. But the iOS has a new way of scheduling screen time and seeing what those children are doing online. But there are now these kind of settings on many of our phones, so do have a look at what the manufacturers are saying. And if you can start to look at all those devices, it will give you a lot more confidence. But it's not just devices. We can also have controls over the broadband providers as well. So at a broadband level, we can set different levels for different devices, and that will help us to have better monitoring of the inappropriate content that is shared when they are using the internet. So one of the things that is a useful thing that people often say has helped them is something called Google Safe Search. So Google Safe Search, it works on certain websites and internet platforms such as Google, iTunes. So you can switch on a family-friendly filter. So what this filter does is it blocks, or nothing's foolproof, but it blocks pretty well content which is unsuitable for children. So on YouTube, there's restricted mode, for example. There's actually YouTube for kids, which has been built with children in mind. And so, yes, nothing is flawless. Nothing in life is flawless, is it? But it does make sense to use the parental controls that are available to us. And this is one of those that we can try. And these protections are much more useful, especially for very young children, because at that point we can guide and monitor it and control it. But as they get older, they might figure out how to turn off the filter if their curiosity gets the better of them. So think about, that awareness as well as parents, that as they get older, they might be able to change those settings. But particularly if you've got younger children, this is a brilliant starting point. And outside of these sessions on web platforms, you could consider, as well, what kind of web browsers you might be using. So Google Chrome, if you're using that, which is free to download, if you use that, there's a feature on there which helps with account profiles, and you can have supervised profiles. So they can, basically, those users, those supervisors, those managers, they're set for parents to help protect what your children are seeing on the internet. So that's worth a look into as well. So we're just going to look now at a few of these that we've just been discussing. And the first area is YouTube Kids. So this is a specialized app built with children in mind. And as we said, the internet was not created with for children, and that was not the way it was built. So this is a product that it's its first Google product that's been built from the ground up with children in mind. And it offers a more contained and appropriate experience for children. So it's an easier way to manage the use of content online. And the content's generated by YouTube creators, and they try to filter out content that might not be appropriate for kids. So it's a nice way to introduce your children to the internet, particularly when YouTube is becoming more and more popular in screen time than even the TV. So we're just going to have a quick recap now of some of the tools we've been looking at so far. So smartphones, we need to set those boundaries. We need to look at, from the very first connected internet device, what kind of settings we need to ensure are in place and how it's set up, and look at our manufacturer's information. And also the ISP, so the internet service providers that we're using, what kind of filtering can they offer us with the adult material? Because it is there, we can filter to a good extent some safe search around the internet service providers too. So that means probably not all bad stuff is blocked, unfortunately, but nothing's ever fully effective. So it's just about remaining vigilant in line with this supportive tool. And then safe search, as we've mentioned. So services like Facebook and YouTube have minimum age limits, don't they? So there are minimum age limits that we hope that children will sign up to these. But sometimes they want to bring it down. It's that curiosity gets the better of children, but maybe get together with other parents so that you don't bow to that pressure as a group, and you've got a force behind you for this kind of thing so that everyone's in agreement. So these tools are here to provide safety, but there are other things that we need to look at that can be very challenging for children. And one of those is cyber safety, cyberbullying. So we know, don't we? I think we've either seen it or experienced it ourselves at some point in life, that bullying is not a pleasant thing. It makes us feel helpless. It doesn't matter what age or stage we're at. Bullying is not nice. It's not warranted. It's not something we want to happen, particularly for our children. But although we know what bullying is like, we might not have experienced what our children will experience, because the internet and social media have changed the way that they experience childhood bullying. So it's important that we're aware of this. And it's changed because obviously now we're carrying these devices into our homes. So where bullying used to probably stop at the school gates, it can now travel back home with us into our homes on our devices. And so that's different, isn't it, from the traditional bullying that we understand. And, we used to have it on the street and we could shut the doors. So bringing it home, it encourages more people to feel that they can be, anonymous online and bully people, and this sort of thing that can happen in the digital space. And, it's important for us to understand, how that is really an extension of face-to-face bullying most of the time as well, because although it is different to face-to-face, our experience, it is an extension of that, because most bullying still comes from those they already know in person. So it is known to them. So it actually might be making us aware of the bullying that's happening that we might otherwise not necessarily be privy to. But for our children, it's obviously amplifying it by it coming into their homes as well. So it's something we're not familiar with, but it's something that can happen anytime, anywhere, and we need to kind of be aware of this. So there's some things that we need to look out for in this space. The fact is, we know children are spending more time online, obviously much more time than we spent, but more time online in general. It's increasing. And of course, that means the more time you do anything, the more opportunity for a negative to happen as well as positives, because that's also life, that we'll experience highs and lows, positives and negatives. So as mentioned, a lot of the bullying will come from people they know. In fact, over half, it's been shown, comes from people known to them. So identifying that is important to look out for. And then we can start those conversations that are really important with our children about it. And it might just raise our awareness too. And there's different kind of forms of bullying now in the digital world that we might need to be aware of and be familiar with so that we can protect our children. Harassment is targeting an individual or a person with persistent and offensive messages. Basically, it could at some point perhaps develop into cyber stalking. Outing, so this is where they publicly share very personal information or embarrassing information that somebody doesn't want to be shared, and deliberately putting those photos or even videos of people online. Trolling, so this is where they deliberately post provocative and insulting messages to about sensitive subjects as well, of inflicting racism, misogyny, and topics such as this, where it can really impact an individual. Catfishing, so you might have heard of this, but this is where people take over a fake profile and steal someone's identity, and they do it with children too, and they lure people in and start relationships with this information. Roasting, so this is ganging up on an individual and sending offensive sexual abuse until the victim's seen to crack. And then griefing, which is abusing and angering people through online gaming. So much of these activities we can relate to in the real world, but now we can see more compounded in the virtual world as well. So if your child is affected by cyberbullying, there's lots of places that we can go to help with that. So we're going to look at that now. So if you do become aware of your child being cyberbullied, there are some do's and don'ts that we recommend that we can look at to help with that behaviour. So some of the things to do straight away is to find out why. Why is this happening? I know personally as a parent, that would be my first question to ask. Why? And sort of try and establish the facts around the incident and keep an open mind where possible to this. Talk it through. Talk about the blurred line between uploading and sharing content, because there's this kind of compulsion to wanting likes as a child, or even as an adult, to be fair, but sharing some content that they want to get for a funny response and may not even realize is offensive is important to kind of get that conversation going around what is offensive and what can harm, because it can be a blurred line. And also teaching by example, as we do as parents. We kind of model and encourage positive behaviour in our children and praising them for the same, taking that on board and learning from it, because above all, your child's going to learn from this, and so are you going to learn from what's happened and think, what could that maybe do to help them differently as a parent going forward from that point. But the don'ts, don't get upset. And this is easier said than done, isn't it, as parents? Because, of course, they're the most important things in our world. But keeping calm is going to help them, and discussing it is going to help us get to the bottom of what's really happening and, really work through those emotions together, so that they know that they can talk to us about any situation that comes up. And there's just so many that do come up that it's nice to have that open conversation. And don't ignore it, because I know there might be a tendency to be so fearful that we turn our eye away from it. But actually, you're doing the great thing by being at something like this today, because you're taking it on board and facing up to it rather than hiding from it, which is one of the most key things to do. And also, don't condone it. So if you discover that your child was maybe cyberbullying in retaliation, two wrongs do not make a right. So, really encouraging that kind of thinking as well. And don't take away their devices. I know that's the temptation, but it looks like a punishment, and it could also look worse and encourage them to do more. I mean, it's human nature to try and do what we're not allowed to do. So it's important to mention that nobody likes to think that their own child could be a bully, but potentially, they're getting pulled into that, and young people can sometimes be drawn into that and don't realize the impact of their behaviors. So keeping it nice and open for them to be able to feel safe to discuss those things will be really helpful to you and your children as well. Online grooming. So this is probably something you've heard about, and it's known such as grooming as a word to describe people befriending children in a way to take advantage of them for sexual purposes. So this can be a very tricky area to talk to your children about, but let's start by looking at what we can look out for from the beginning. So basically, it is easy, isn't it, to pretend to be something you're not and to hide behind a screen online. So those conversations that your children think they're having with real people may be with identities that are not real. And I think even as adults, we might have been exposed or heard of those sort of situations. So online grooming can be hard for us as parents and carers because we think, this is happening in our home. And also groomers specifically warn children to not tell parents about it. So it can be harder for us to identify that that's happening. So online groomers as well, they're often, sometimes they're not strangers. So we, might meet these people in certain situations and they build rapport and befriend them online. So sometimes the children don't even realize, or, often don't realize they're being groomed and they just think they've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever. So, a lot of this is worth being aware of. As horrible as it is, it's something that we've got to keep our eyes open to. It will also obviously depend on your child's age and maturity level, about the kind of things that will upset your child in terms of images that, might be more directed at adults. So, looking at things that can lead your child into this kind of secretive behavior is something that we need to create an open dialogue about and keep those conversations flowing. And it's important that we have these conversations and just keep having them, and, maybe set up a regular event of talking about things in general, such as the internet, so that they can feel that they can come to you with these topics. And of course, grooming, it's a tricky topic, isn't it, for us to talk about? So if you do feel uncomfortable doing this, there's a good way to kind of get around it, and that is reading a story. So you can read a story about this happening to somebody else and ask them, do you know of any friends or similar situations, to open up that conversation. I know that there's lots of books out there on emotions and developing emotions for children. It's Dragon series of books, and I don't know that there's online grooming necessarily in those books, but opening up those emotional discussions and giving an objective story about it makes it less, on you and your child, to make it too personal and too uncomfortable. But do talk about the risks. So, make sure your child knows that not everyone online is who they say they are, and not everybody is there to be a real friend. And agree the rules. So about, personal sharing of information, what should and shouldn't be shared, and let them know to never share pictures of their body online, and also never to meet people online as well. And one of the best things, I know we turn our eyes away from things that we don't understand and we haven't grown up necessarily in this world, but if they're on Snapchat, if they're on TikTok, joining those channels and being a part of it is going to be a way to protect them and monitor what's happening, and also understand how safe they are in those places. So privacy settings. This is a great way for us to kind of check our social media accounts and make sure that our children's social media accounts are as protected as can be. So the best way to deal with grooming and to prevent it from happening, is to make sure your child is well informed. Use these privacy settings on social networks and let them know that they can talk to you, as we said, if they feel unsafe, if they feel worried, and start that dialogue early. And remind them that, it is 13 to be on these social networks, and get that group together to enforce it. But if you do have concerns, or if your child or someone has concerns, there is something called the CEOP. And I think Sam will be sharing that now in the chat. And that's a safety centre which really looks at this topic of online grooming in particular. So now we've looked at online privacy. We're going to also consider identity fraud. And just like adults, it does happen to children. It might be that they take, their online identity and misuse it. And so we need to know what information is safe to share online, and the privacy settings there to make sure that they are protected on the devices that they use. So if your child's identity is stolen, you might not know for a long time. Things may be a giveaway, like a bill coming through in their name, emails coming through that weren't expected, government letters, tax bills. So, we might not know any of this for a while, and it could lead to blackmail, grooming. So it's great for us to build those relationships with our children so that they can understand not to share that information online or too much of it. So we'll check their privacy settings. So that's where we can check on every social networking, what privacy they've got there, and agree with them who they're going to share with and what. So that can set you up nicely from the beginning. Check their device settings. So check the devices on their tablets, their mobile, and things to look out for are things like your location settings, your photos, if they're sharing calendars, photos, a Bluetooth microphone. Have a look at all of these, also advertising. And have a look at the safety pages that are on all devices to make sure that you've got all your protection that you can in place. And find out what's already out there. Have you ever Googled your child's full name? See what comes up, any photos, any imagery. And if you do see something you don't like, reach out to those particular bodies and places to get it removed. And if possible, try and get your children to search incognito as well. So we have got a question through from Anna, but I think Sam might answer that for us, because hopefully she's mentioned, how can we monitor without having access to their mobiles? Is it possible? Hopefully we are answering that question throughout this session as well, but that Sam's there to talk to too, just in terms of time, if you have any further questions other than what's being covered in the content today. So talking about online safety with your children, we've said it, we know that this is an important thing to do. So digital resilience in children doesn't need to actually be overwhelming. It's just about taking that responsibility and tackling it head on together. And, we're not perfect. Parents are not perfect. People are not perfect. We don't have to be. So good enough parenting is good enough. Because perfect, well, it's impossible. Get those conversations started. Let's not bury our heads in the sand. Let's just start those conversations. Start today. Commit yourself to talking about, what these sort of Snapchats are, what these different things they're using, and, get some learning and get involved with it yourself, and then open up that line of communication, because you could be missing golden opportunities to explore, how safe and informed your children are. And they say become a digital mum or a digital dad is the best way to manage this. And there are 4 simple ways to keep that conversation flowing. And that is what we're going to look at now. So understanding the risks. So understanding the risks is, remembering they are risks, that risks are not harm. So just understanding those risks, keeping the risks in proportion. So actually the UK is one of the safest places in the world for children to be online. And communicate regularly and consistently. Keep that communication going and put in place those tools and settings we've talked about and will mention too in a moment. And as they grow, build the strategies and resilience for each stage, because each stage will have a different challenge, as it does as they grow in general. So be inquisitive with the challenges they see and hear. Always feel that they can speak to you and be open and free to speak to them back. And then be well versed and confident yourself in those channels that you're wanting to monitor them on. And that will help you both feel more educated and secure. So some of the resources to help you, there's lots out there. Be Internet Legends is a brilliant one. It's really beautiful. I'll talk about it in a moment. But it's really beautiful, and it's gamified, so it engages your children in something that really is colourful and useful. Family Link, we've mentioned. The IWF, that also looks at online grooming and keeping children safe online. The CEOP we mentioned just a moment ago, but that's all about policing harassment of children online. And of course, Childline and our partner, Internet Matters. So do have a look at these different organisations. I'm sure that Samantha will share those links with you now in the chat. Thank you, Samantha. So Internet Legends, this is a place that it is completely free to use, and they have 5 pillars that they base their safety upon. And because it's colourful, because it's gamified, the children really get involved in it. And it opens up, the most important thing is it opens up them to wanting discussions around these kind of pieces of information. What we're finding from the Internet Legends feedback is that children will go and say, how do I not use a card, or how do I change my password and protect it, or lots of different questions, or that are really healthy, that tell us that Internet Legends, alongside this other content, helps children to be more protected online. So that's really valuable and encouraging when they come and ask you things like that. And the 5 pillars are looking at being internet sharp. So this online safety program looks at how you can share, information, but the good news and bad, it travels fast. So it's about how they can deal with tricky situations and what lasting consequences can come out of it. And it's really interesting to be done in a game because it makes it more approachable and friendly, and it helps them know also how they can prevent that from happening in a nice, educated way, but also fun. Also being internet alert, so it's about these games also help teach them, when to look for real people and what real people are and what they're not, and kind of different ways to see where the reality lies. And being internet secure, so it helps you looking at protecting your own privacy online, your content, and keeping your information valuable and their information valuable, and also their reputation, their relationships, the things that are going to last long after they've used whatever they're using in that moment. And being kind, about building that respect and building that kindness up within that space. And so, building relationships as importantly there as you do in the real world. So Interland's a great way of doing this. Do have a look at the link that I'm sure Sam will share in the chat there for you, because this really brings it to life. And also Parent Zone, you might have come across this, but this is a great way that's interacting and in line with schools as well for helping us across the UK look at fun and challenging ways to manage safety. So there's no further questions. Thank you so much for coming. What are your next steps? Please do go to ge.co/digital garage and have a look at our other online safety courses such as Safety First. And it's been an absolute pleasure to see, didn't see you, but I know you're all there, to have you all here today. And I hope that you've taken some good safety tips away with you. And please do leave your feedback at goo.gov/digital garage feedback. I've been Annie and we've had Samantha. Thank you very much, Samantha. I'm sure you can agree she's been great in the chat. And look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye for now.